Hey guys, Dev with Crime Hive, and I'm back in another video with the Peter Manfredonia case. Actually, I have the arrest warrant in his case, and this gives us more insight, more details, a lot more details than is typically covered on the news and in that, because this is what put Peter behind bars, the reasons, the facts and circumstances. And I always love to go off the affidavits. There's even more information that could be gathered from the arrest reports. I don't know if that's all released at this point, but we really get a good idea of what happened on his initial crime spree, really, in regard to the murders, the home invasion, the kidnapping. You know, he was gone. He was on the loose for 6 days before he was captured. You know, this is Peter Manfredonia, 23 years old. I've got several other videos about this case, and so I'm going to do a follow-up here with the affidavit. That's what we're going to talk about here. So I will move my screen here and make that smaller. So right here, you know, this comes from the state of Connecticut. If you guys have been following this case, we know that he was charged with murder, kidnapping, home invasion, weapons charges, all these different things. And this really tells us more of the story. And throughout this, another thing that's really interesting, and I think you guys will find this interesting, is how he was able to evade police with all the technology and everything that law enforcement has at their disposal. He had some pretty clever ways, and he was very proud apparently to explain this information to police. So really interesting how he was able to really evade police with these tactics that he did, and I'll explain that throughout the affidavit as well. Before I do begin this, again, this is Dev with Crime Hive. If you like these kind of true crime videos, subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell notification for updates as I come out with other videos, as I'm doing other cases as well. So here we go. We're going to talk about this here. It looks like when this was filed, he had a $5 million bond. And this comes from a detective here with the Connecticut State Police. And so what he starts out with is, he talks about on Friday, May 22nd. This is about 9 a.m. And you know, what really happens is he responds. This is when there's a 911 call. This is what really starts this case. And we know that 62-year-old Ted Demers was the first victim in this case. Now, I really want to point out more of the details that wasn't really released in the initial, you know, media outlet reports and that kind of stuff. So, one thing I didn't really know is that the victim literally had a severed limb, and it was because a samurai sword was used. So we know the first part where Peter, he was on his way, and he mentioned, and you'll see what I mean later on in the affidavit. He was on his way. His intended target was his former girlfriend, if you will, that was going to file a restraining order against him. So it sounds like he was on his way to potentially murder her and kill her. And unfortunately, Ted Demers, and then also another 80-year-old who really had critical injuries from, I mean, they were sliced with a sword, and the other victim did live, but these were unintended victims. And Peter says later on in this affidavit that you know, apparently Theodore had apparently said something that just triggered him to go off, you know, and he didn't really elaborate on that. And, you know, he didn't really talk to police too much at length. I mean, we'll talk about that here at the end as well, but he did give some information, especially about how he evaded capture, that sort of stuff. But yeah, so that's where it really starts to give you an idea. And this sword was located in the woods near the scene of that assault and homicide. So that's what kind of triggered this series of events in this crime spree. So going through, they immediately had Peter as a suspect in that. So early on in this investigation, they knew it was him that was most likely involved. They started tracking him. Now we learned that on Sunday, May 24th, this is just 2 days after, early on, 6:43 a.m., you've got the Derby Police Department in Connecticut. They hear about the abandoned white Ford F-150 pickup truck. Now, what happened with that is apparently Peter was trying to enter a field to this state park here. It looks like the Osborndale State Park, because he was going to try to go into hiding into these deep, thick woods, which can make it very, difficult for someone to locate you in these woods. So anyway, he was going to go there, but he got caught up on some rocks, and so he basically had to abandon the truck. Now this happened to be near one of his former friends, or acquaintance that he knew, who was the second victim, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But so what happens is the Derby police, they were aware of the first homicide in Willington. Again, this information is from these from this truck. They probably had an alert, an attempt to locate on that plate, which linked Peter to the first event, and so they had a good idea that it was most likely related to this. And then so what they find out is, so they run the plate, right, for this truck, and they realize that it's to a 74-year-old registered owner, and they go to his home, and they actually find him tied to a chair in the basement. So that's really interesting that we knew that this victim, which I'm not going to give his name, they actually don't even release his name in this anyway, but this victim was literally tied to a chair in the basement. And we know some details from previous reports as to what happened, but this gives you more context if you guys are wondering more of the details of this particular story. So what happened was, this victim, and he was the victim of the home invasion, he said that he was quite aware of the murder. I mean, he talks about it right here, that he knew there was a murder close to where he lived. And so he actually went to sleep with, and it's all blanked out, but what I'm assuming this is his weapon. So he's got some guns, he's got some weapons, and he's got it close by. But he's right, it's with him. But he dozes off, and apparently he wakes up, and he wakes up abruptly at 5:15 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, May 23rd, to a male holding a gun to the back of his head and shouting at him to not turn around, or that he would blow my effing brains out. I'm not gonna say the full word, try to keep it a little bit more PG, but that's what he said. Now, this was Peter that had gone into the home. This is a home invasion, okay? So he talks about how he described Peter as well. He says that he was kind of soiled, as his sweatpants were soiled, as if he'd been in the woods, and then he said he was barefoot, which is really kind of interesting. Kind of shows the mind frame of Peter. He's barefoot. I mean, he's kind of in a reckless mindset at this point. He's showing up at his house. He ends up seeing a picture on the news. So he's talking with Peter, and he sees a picture of him on the news, and he suspected that was probably him that was the murder suspect. So Peter apparently zip ties his wrists together behind his back, puts duct tape over his eyes, and then he places him in the basement, and then he duct tapes the home invasion victim to the chair. So more details about that. Now, while he's talking to Peter apparently tells this victim that his name is Rick, and they're talking. The news comes on, shows a picture of Peter, and so the victim knows that this is Peter that has him tied up, and so he even asks him about it, and why he's calling himself Rick, and Peter just said he said it for the hell of it. So he knew it was Peter. Now, apparently they're having a conversation. He and Peter's telling this victim that he hadn't slept for 5 days, and he just flipped. He just flipped. He said he didn't know why he did it, and when I say did it, he's talking about the first murder. Apparently he expressed that he was remorseful for it, and so he was having a conversation with him, which is really interesting because apparently this victim didn't say anything or do anything to trigger Peter, who was known to have some mental health issues, and apparently he gets away alive. He's tied up to the chair, but he's alive to this day. Now he was held captive apparently for about 24 hours. Now Peter was able to get off with the victim's Ford F-150 truck, which was found. That was what Peter tried to use to go into the field, and then it got stuck. He wasn't able to maneuver that anymore. but he stole guns. He was able to steal about $1,000 to $1,500 in cash, so he already has cash on hand. And then and then from here, so it looks like the victim was later able to identify Peter from a photo lineup. So he goes to the police, explains this whole situation, and typically with those photo lineups, the detectives, they'll put a lineup of maybe 6 photos, typically about 6 photos, and so they're going to show people that look like Peter. They try to keep it as similar as possible. If Peter, Peter right here, he's got this kind of a darker hair, shorter hair. He's not wearing glasses, that sort of thing. They're going to have pictures that look very similar to Peter, and then they ask the victim to choose which photo they think the victim is. Now they'll typically give a statement at the beginning saying that none of these photos may be the suspect, and if it's not, to just let him know. Sometimes, in other cases, victims feel compelled to choose somebody from those photo lineups, though, and they end up choosing somebody who wasn't a suspect, and that's happened many times, unfortunately, in the past. I just wanted to kind of give that as just a side note, but we'll get back to this case here in just a second. Just wanted to explain the photo lineup process here. There's different ways to do that, but typically, the detective or the officer is supposed to advise the victim that the person or people in the photos may not be involved in the crime, and to not choose anybody if they're not sure that it is, if they don't recognize their face. So just wanted to mention that. Now, going back to the case here, so on that Sunday, May 24th, the Connecticut State Police, they respond to the F-150, and they immediately are concerned. So they actually set up a perimeter. They have a canine team apparently, and they start searching this area. So they're very involved in locating Peter very early on. And I know this drew out for about 6 days, but they were really, really working this case. And there was a lot of things that went behind the scenes. So now we get more into the details of Peter's second victim. Unfortunately, another person died. There were 2 people that died in this case, on this crime spree that he went on, this manhunt. They tried to find Peter. Unfortunately, 2 victims were killed in this process. So the second victim, this explains it here in much more detail. So you've got May 24th, 2020 at about 11:04 a.m. They then receive a 911 call. And this is from a male who was screaming that he needed an ambulance for Nick. And we're talking about this victim right here. Okay, this is the first victim, by the way, Theodore Demers. And then you've got, right here, you've got Nicholas Eisele. Eisele is, I believe is how you say his last name. Nicholas, unfortunately, was killed as well. Now, so I'll just refer to him as Nicholas here. And if we go back here into the affidavit, so apparently he's saying that Nick and that Peter Manfredonia he thought that he possibly had stabbed Nick. He said there's a black Volkswagen, and that Nick's girlfriend was captive. So you're kind of just getting this information as the 911 calls out, and we're going to go much more in detail on this here through the affidavit. But so you've got first responding officers show up to this address, 404 Roosevelt Drive, and this is also in Connecticut. So they find a deceased male lying face down in a pool of blood in the bedroom. Unfortunately, that ends up being Nick, who was killed. So what we learned from this encounter here, this is where we get more into the detail. This was Nick. His girlfriend was missing along with her. This was her 2016 Volkswagen Jetta that was also missing, that allowed Peter to get away and create more distance from police, and it went into multiple states. We had Pennsylvania involved and Maryland, and so this drew on, but he was able to get away. Now what we learned, and this was, so they interviewed the girlfriend, and she's referred to as victim number 2 if you're seeing the affidavit here. So she said that Nicholas and Manfredonia knew each other from going to school together, and they were aware from media posts that Peter was wanted and was being sought after for the first murder in Willington, Connecticut. So they were very much aware. Let's see, Derby police found the vehicle that Manfredonia stole located in the vicinity of Nicholas's residence. Okay, so they knew. They began calling and texting Nicholas and victim number 2, but neither one of them answered. Okay, so this is one of the family members that was aware of these things that were going on. So this person, and I don't know the name, they actually are the ones that this person found Nicholas dead when he reported it to 911. So he said he was very much aware of the things that were going on. When he found out about the truck that was located, and it happened to be nearby Nicholas's residence, he began frantically calling both Nicholas and his girlfriend. Couldn't get a hold of them. Their phone was just going to voicemail. So he actually drives over there, and that's when he notices the door was shut, but it was unlocked. And then he goes in. He finds stuff all over the kitchen floor. This is where he finds Nicholas lying on the floor in the bedroom doorway. And so he finds the knife. He says that Nicholas's body was hard as a rock, and that's when he immediately calls 911. We're going to go into more details on that particular incident because they also interviewed Nicholas's girlfriend who survived this encounter. She was the kidnapped victim, and she is still alive to this day as well. So before we get to her interview in this affidavit, what they found was surveillance footage that they were able to review by nearby businesses. And what they saw was on Sunday, May 24th, 2020, at about 5:52 a.m., they actually see Peter Manfredonia walking into the driveway of Nicholas's residence. They actually see him go to the second floor apartment, and shortly after, they see at about 6 a.m., they see a female, which was Nicholas's girlfriend, and then Peter are both seen entering the black sedan, which was the Volkswagen. She enters the driver door, and Peter goes into the rear passenger side door of the vehicle. So it actually captured that information on video. Now, the U.S. Marshals are getting involved. Very well known, obviously, for finding fugitives, and they did a very, very good job in this case to help apprehend Peter. Now, a couple other tidbits before I get to the girlfriend's interview, where she actually, she witnessed what happened. So we're going to explain that. But before that, some of the ways that law enforcement was able to kind of pinpoint where Peter was going is they had license plate readers in New York that had photoed the Volkswagen Jetta, so it had recorded that, and then it also recorded it traveling west into New Jersey, and then apparently at 13:18 hours, which is 1:18 p.m., New Jersey State Police received a 911 call from a Good Samaritan that had stated that Nicholas's girlfriend was with him. And we're going to talk about that Samaritan as well. There's actually some pretty interesting stuff that happens with that story. So we're going to talk about that here. This is going to be a longer video, just so you guys know as I go through this, there's just a lot of information to cover. What do you guys think so far about this? Did you guys learn anything new from this case? There's a lot more detail in here that may not have been mentioned on news reports. So I'm really giving you the information from the arrest affidavit. That again, there is a lot more detail than this from the actual police reports, but I don't have that information right now. This is really the information that the detective gathers to bring to a judge and gives them the probable cause to arrest Peter. So that's the information. This information is supporting the crimes that he committed to make that arrest. And so what happens from here is you've got license plate readers. I told you that, the truck stop. Let's go to the interview now here. This is where we really learn much more information here about the second murder. And so the girlfriend of Nicholas was interviewed. Now, she talks about how she and Nick had heard that Peter was wanted for the murder. And so they knew this early on too. I mean, people in the area are spooked already. They're like locking their doors. Even Nick and the girlfriend were locking the doors, and they even blocked Peter on social media. So they were a little freaked out, rightly so. Now, so they were, and then they go to sleep. They go to sleep this night, and before they wake up on Sunday, May 24th, right here. she sleeps deep. So apparently Nick's a light sleeper. She's sleeping through the initial stages of this attack. Now she wakes up at about 5:45 a.m. and she's hearing Nick, her boyfriend, saying relax and calm down loudly from the living room. So, and this is what she's describing here to detectives in this interview. She says she hears a scuffle and she heard someone bump into the TV stand. She sees Nick and Peter, and she's like, what's going on? She asks Nick, is everything okay? And Nick's yelling, no, it's Peter Manfredonia, call 911. So she is trying to call 911, and she sees that there's a struggle with Peter and her boyfriend Nick. Nick apparently had ripped Peter's yellow windbreaker at one point. She goes to the bedroom to try to grab her cell phone. Next thing you know, bedroom doors being pushed in. Nick and Peter are still tussling, and then Nick's girlfriend says that she believed that Peter was trying to come after her and that Nick was trying to stop him. So at this point, she has the phone in her hands, and Peter Manfredonia rips the phone out of her hand. All right. She is extremely scared, obviously. She then just runs to the front door and just curls up in a ball. Now, many of you've heard kind of, how people react in these kind of situations. And you've got the fight or flight, and then there's also the freeze. You got fight, flight, or freeze. She obviously just so overwhelmed, in shock, doesn't know what to do. She just curls up in a ball. She's scared out of her mind, which happens to a lot of people. Some people will fight. Some people, they get scared, they try to run, they flee, and then some people just freeze. They don't know what to do in these kind of situations. And that's why it's hard to understand sometimes, why did this person do this? Why did this victim do that? Their mindset is very different than another person. I mean, you put another person in that same place, the reaction could be very different. So anyway, she freezes up. Now, while this is happening, she then hears gunshots. And as soon as she hears the shots, she's screaming to the top of her lungs, she says, in hopes to wake the downstairs neighbor. Now, she sees Peter with a black handgun in his hand. He's saying shut up to her, and she's asking Peter to call for help, and he just is flat out saying, no, he's dead. I shot him in the head. So more details in this case. These are things that I was not aware of. Just a really sad story, obviously, as I'm telling it. But this is coming from Nick's girlfriend as she sees it. So next thing you know, Peter said that there were 2 shots fired, and he was very sure that Nick was dead. He then begins asking the girlfriend for the car keys. So she basically gets him the keys and says, hey, take the car, leave. And he says, no, you're coming with me. So she then tries to tell him, hey, Nick has approximately $5,000 to $7,000 of cash on the coffee table. And he ends up taking apparently this duffel bag that has another $2,000 cash in the bag. And next thing you know, he lets her get dressed. And now this was interesting here too, because this is more detail in the case here. She thought she saw Nick moving a little bit, and so she really wanted to get him help. And she was saying, hey, can we call 911? Can we get help? And but then she got concerned that Peter might shoot Nick again because Nick might still be alive. So she was trying to save Nick, and so she ends up saying, never mind, he didn't move. So she was hoping that maybe Nick was alive, maybe he would get help, maybe he would be saved. But anyway, she ends up leaving with Peter Manfredonia in her Volkswagen Jetta. And then this is where, again, he's getting in the rear passenger seat. He's got his gun. She's driving. Now, while she's driving, this is all at Manfredonia's direction. Apparently, he doesn't know where he's going specifically, but they end up taking back roads, a lot of back roads to try to avoid police. And in her mind, she's thinking, this is where we kind of get more into her mindset too. I mean, there's a lot more detail in this affidavit. She's saying, she tries driving erratically, and she's trying to get stopped by the police. I mean, she's contemplating driving into a tree, And, she even thought about, driving into the Newtown Police Department. And she decided not to do that because apparently Peter's wearing a seatbelt. So she's got all these thoughts running through her mind. But she's also extremely worried because, you've got Peter that keeps threatening, saying he didn't want to kill her, and don't make me kill you. She's already witnessed a murder in front of her. She's complying with him. I mean, she's not about to get shot herself. So, it looked like Peter was, pointing her towards the mountains. He was looking again to get to this wooded area so that he can hide out. At one point, he ends up changing his clothes. The reason I mention this is so they park off, this abandoned building. He changes his clothes. I mean, he's actively trying to evade capture. I mean, he is trying to get away. He's of a mindset where he knows what he has done is wrong. And, whether he had mental health issues or not, he's still actively trying to avoid capture. And these are all little details that show exactly this as I continue to read through it. So interesting, bizarre story here too that was that I did not even know about, and maybe a lot of you guys didn't know about as well. What took place when we learned about the Uber situation, and he was known to have taken several Ubers. I'm going to get to the point where we learn how he evaded capture and how he was able to take these Uber drivers, and police weren't able to necessarily figure this out. But it's really interesting. So what we learned from here is, so he puts on these different clothes. Now, Nick's girlfriend is trying to gather information to tell investigators, and she remembers that he had red shoes on. Those red shoes definitely stuck out with Peter, and a lot of things were mentioned with that case. So when police were trying to find him. Now, what else was I going to say here? So again, he kept threatening. He has the handgun between his legs. Now, he apparently entered several locations into the GPS unit of Nicholas's girlfriend's vehicle, right? So he put in places like New Jersey, Jersey Shore, Delaware, Nashville, Tennessee. And then here's what he did. So he apparently located Nicholas's girlfriend's deactivated iPhone in the center console. And then what Peter did was so it was, apparently it was reported lost and it was deactivated. And so there was only Wi-Fi use available only. So what he does is he deletes all the apps. He closes her iCloud account and he begins to try to open a new, sorry, that's the timer there, cooking some food. Anyway, sorry for the distraction there. Anyway, so she begins to try to open a new Apple ID under the name Rick Sanchez. So he's trying to use this name of Rick Sanchez. And really interesting though, these are all steps, again, overt steps to try to, cover who he is and try to evade police, evade capture, right? So, next thing here. So we learn that while they're driving to this course in the car together, Peter again starts talking about these crimes. So he is telling yet another witness who can corroborate what happened in the last 36 hours. So what you have going on is you've got him telling Nicholas's girlfriend about the four-wheeler and how Theodore was not the intended target and that something had triggered him and he snapped, right? So that's where we kind of learn about that. I mean, he's telling her this, and he was saying that he was trying to escape and that innocent people got in the way. So he's telling all this information. He talks about the truck, how he crashed it in the field, and let's see what else here. Yeah, and then he says apparently the same thing. He says Nick apparently had said something that triggered him, and he snapped. Right. So again, same thing. Apparently they're saying something to him, according to Peter, and he snaps and he ends up killing them. So it's interesting. He did not kill Nicholas's girlfriend, and he did not kill the home invasion victim as well. So, I'm not sure what made him choose to save some lives and not save other lives. Really interesting there. But this is where we get to the interesting story here with the whole Uber situation. Really, really kind of bizarre. But what happens is Nick's girlfriend saying to Peter, "Hey, I'm exhausted. We gotta get off here. To the McDonald's." And she's just wanting to go home. Anyway, they go to the McDonald's because Peter's looking for Wi-Fi for the deactivated iPhone. And then what he starts doing is he starts asking several people in the parking lot to help him get an Uber ride. So he's asking several people there, kind of strange all on its own. A 911 call could have been called during this time. Maybe he could have been captured earlier on in this investigation, because he's wandering around asking random people for this Uber ride. And then he actually finds somebody that's willing to help him. Pretty interesting here. Don't know who this person is. It's at this truck stop, right? This is right in Columbia, New Jersey. So it's on the Pennsylvania border. That's kind of what opens up the investigation with New Jersey as well. And then what happens is he starts asking Nicholas's girlfriend to come up to people that are not with children or women in case he had to use his weapon. So, even she's helping, trying to find if somebody can help with an Uber ride. And then apparently they encountered this male, and his name's blocked out. But and they were asking for a ride. He declines. And then Peter says, "Hey, I'll give you money if you can call me an Uber, because I got to get to work at a Starbucks in Allentown, Pennsylvania," is what he says. So he agrees to order an Uber for Peter. Really interesting. He tries to secure an Uber, but it wasn't available in the area. So what happens is apparently this guy gets Peter hooked up with a limousine for $200. So apparently this limousine might pick up Peter at this truck stop and take him to his destination. And apparently that kind of falls apart, though, because it's going to be about an hour or two before it arrives. And then Peter agrees to this, though. So he leaves, or he's still at the truck stop. But this other guy leaves the truck stop, returns shortly after, and says that he actually found an Uber driver, but that Peter would need to go across the river into Pennsylvania. So now the Uber's back on the table for Peter, and you've got Nicholas's girlfriend who's trying to get out of this situation. Obviously, she's asking, "Hey, could you give Peter a ride to meet this Uber driver?" And again, he says no. But what ends up happening is he talks on the phone with apparently this Uber driver who agrees to come to the truck stop to pick up Peter. Now, at one point, Peter didn't trust him when this man was on the phone. He actually left in his car at a safe distance to watch in case maybe the guy was trying to call police, which he didn't do. And then Peter drives back to meet up with the man who got him this ride. So they end up getting an Uber driver to agree to come to the truck stop and pick up Peter. Okay, really interesting story. Now the Uber arrives. Now this is where it gets pretty interesting. This is how we kind of find out, how Peter wound up in this other state and kind of where he's at right now. Now the Uber driver ends up coming, and Peter gives a $100 bill to the guy that helped him secure the Uber, and then he gives Nicholas's girlfriend $200 gas money. Now, Manfredonia apparently gets into the Uber. He starts to drive off in it, but then he stops, opens the window, and is like, "Hey, are you leaving?" To Nicholas's girlfriend, who's still in her car. She's like, "Yeah, I'm going to leave." Now, as soon as the Uber drives off, of course, what is she doing? She had signaled apparently to the guy that was helping Peter, like, "Hey, wait for me." I don't know what she was doing, eye movements, I'm not sure, hand gestures, saying, "Hey, wait for me." Now, as soon as Peter leaves in this Uber, she basically spills the beans to this guy saying, "Hey, he's a murderer. I've been kidnapped. We got to get police." That's where the 911 call comes in, right? She calls 911. She's reporting all this information. Apparently, she was on 911 for 14 minutes and 25 seconds. And she gives all these details about what had happened and what led up to this point. So that same day, on that Sunday, May 24th, they've done a search warrant for the property where Nicholas and the girlfriend lived. They're finding evidence like, the expended 9mm shell casing, a projectile, live 9mm rounds, and they end up doing an autopsy, we learned too, on May 25th, 2020. And what we learned from there is he did die from gunshot wounds to the head. So they determined that was a homicide. That's what the autopsy had concluded there. Now, we learned that on Wednesday, May 27th, at about 9 p.m., Manfredonia was located and captured at a gas station in Hagerstown, Maryland. Okay, so there was a lot more that happened in between that point. I mean, there was surveillance footage of Peter in Maryland, and we don't have a lot of details from this arrest warrant. So I'm not going to really get into that, but we do learn something very interesting that he was able to do, and how he was able to kind of evade capture with the whole Uber situation. I mean, he secured multiple Ubers after this, so that's what we're going to talk about. Unfortunately, it doesn't talk about the theft of the vehicles. I was really curious about that. You know, how did that happen? Because he just didn't strike me as some sort of criminal that could just go in and steal a vehicle. So my understanding was maybe the keys were in there, or it was already running when he was able to steal another vehicle. But you know, it doesn't really explain that. So the last thing I want to point out here in this case that I thought was really interesting is the detectives end up capturing him. I'll mention that real quick, and then I'll talk about the interview. So they end up capturing him. He had all his belongings apparently 200 yards away from where he was apprehended. They still found $4,638 in cash. So he still had money to kind of survive and get away in further distance from the police, but he was captured. They found the gun. Looking through the serial number check, that came back to the 74-year-old home invasion in Connecticut. So everything's linking up to Peter and these crimes. You know, they're starting to put all the pieces together. Now, the last part I want to mention is the interview before I end this video. Now, this was pretty interesting. They conducted the interview on May 27th, 2020 at approximately 11:19 p.m. Now, apparently, Peter talks with his attorney on the phone and signs a written waiver of his rights. So he ends up speaking with police, but it's just kind of an odd interview because it lasts about an hour and 48 minutes. And they start questioning about the events, and he just refused to answer those questions. And he would just, you know, basically say, you know, next question. You know, he just wouldn't answer the question. So he did apparently really open up about this one particular part in the case, and that was how he was able to get 2 Uber rides while he was on the run. So here's what he did. This was kind of, you know, interesting to learn how this went about. But what he did apparently is while he was on the run, he buys a prepaid iPhone, and then he ends up buying a touchscreen laptop at a Walmart. So then he uses that laptop to generate an email address. And this is coming right from the affidavit. And then he says that he used that email to associate it with the iPhone. Okay, so then he's using Straight Talk as the provider for his prepaid phone. He used cash to purchase a prepaid debit card that he then used to link the payment source for an Uber account that he created on the iPhone using the Uber app. So that's how that went down. That's how he did that. He was then able to download and use the Uber app by using places with free public Wi-Fi, like McDonald's, you know, Starbucks, places like that have free Wi-Fi. He was able to use those free resources there. And then he was able to download, you know, we know that he was able to take 2 Ubers using that account, okay? So that explains, you know, quite a bit of information. A lot of people had questions about that, like how couldn't they track his phone faster or find out where he was? Police did a really good job with using the technology they had, but Peter was pretty intelligent in this aspect of it, pretty creative on his end to try to evade capture there. But that's really the last thing I wanted to mention. Again, really the facts and circumstances, the probable cause that lead to the arrest. I hope you guys found this information helpful. I know I learned a lot more detail from the affidavit, the arrest affidavit. And of course, Peter's still in jail. You've got him looking at these charges of murder, kidnapping, robbery, you know, weapons charges. So a lot of things going on still with this case and a lot of unanswered questions, but this does answer quite a few as we learn more about this case. Again, guys, this is Dev with Crime Hive. I will be back with another video, most likely on another case soon. You guys take care, and we will chat with you soon. Thanks.